Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer DeVito. I'm the moderator for this session. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to make sure that your microphone is muted and to wait to be invited to speak before you unmute. Please feel free to use chat. Also, the session is being recorded. I want to introduce today's presenters. They are Deanna Roberts and Jennifer Loubriel, both from Columbia University. Deanna is the Circulation and Reserves Assistant at the Burke Library at Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University Libraries, and is a recent graduate of the University at Buffalo MILS program. She is interested in the intersection of ethics and academic librarianship, information literacy, scholarly communications, and the pipeline from paraprofessional to professional librarian roles within academic libraries. She has found a home working in the area of theological librarianship and is an active member of the American Theological Libraries Association. She also has a rescue dog named Bella and is a lifelong figure skater. The next presenter is Jennifer Loubriel. She's a library assistant in the Reserves Department at Butler Library at Columbia University Libraries. She's currently working towards an MLIS at St. John's University. She was a 2019 Spectrum Scholar and is the first recipient of the Virginia Proctor Powell Florence Class of 1919 Friends of the Oberlin College Libraries Graduate Library School Scholarship. Her personal and professional interests center activism and community within Black and Latinx diaspora. As someone committed to critical librarianship, she plans to follow on the ways which libraries are sites of social justice, history reclamation, and creative community centers. Their presentation today is titled Course Reserves in Pandemic Times, Strategy for Moving Forward. So welcome everyone, and I'll turn it over to Deanna and Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm just going to share my screen here as we get started. Can everybody see this? Okay, great, awesome. So yes, we are doing a presentation on what it's been like for course reserves during this pandemic period and some thoughts and ideas about what that might look like moving forward. So get us started, we're going to do a little poll. So you can go to slido.com and the code there is the number sign 059601. It is live and ready to go. So if you are there and we'll answer those questions, that'll help us out as we kind of tailor the presentation to who's here. It's a 3-question poll, so I'll just give a little bit longer for this first question here. Okay, so that seems to be about everyone. So our next question, how's it been going? In one word. Yeah, so I'm seeing things like challenging, uneven, good, varied, as expected, trying. Yeah, that's a good one. And then our last question here is about how well does your institution market course reserves to the people in your communities? So it seems an overwhelming majority of us are doing right in the middle, pretty okay at marketing course reserves to our constituents. Seems to be the overwhelming majority of us here in this space. So thank you for participating in this. This will help us as we move forward. So again, my name is Deanna Roberts, and I am coming to you from the Burke Library at Union Theological Seminary, which is one of 21 libraries at Columbia. So we're a fairly large system. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I have been here at Columbia for just about 4 years. And at this point, I'm going to transition us over to my fellow co-presenter, Jennifer, and she'll take it over from here.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Deanna. Thank you for everyone for answering on the poll. My name is Jennifer Loubriel. Pronouns are also she, her, and hers. I work at Butler Library at Columbia University in the Reserves Department. Butler is considered the main library on campus, focuses mainly on humanities and social sciences. I also work here as support staff, have been here coming up on 5 years. So a long time to me, not such a long time for some of the other support staff who've been here. Before we really get started into our presentation, we just wanted to do a land acknowledgement to speak about Columbia University currently sits on the occupied territory of the Lenape people. And in the chat, I'm just gonna put in the link that we have on the presentation. This is a link from the Native American Council at Columbia. In 2016, the university created a plaque, sort of monument that speaks to the fact that Columbia is sitting on unceded indigenous land. And as we go through the workshop and focus on the ways in which reserves is really shifting and how we can better support our students, I think it's important just to keep in mind whose land our institutions are built upon and how they do function sort of as continually colonizing spaces, and to make sure that the library work we do is really inclusive, to think about how we can confront these histories, as well as move forward in supporting Indigenous communities and other marginalized communities that we work with. So, as I'm sure is true for everyone, the way that we did course reserves before the pandemic started is a little different than how we're doing it now. In Butler, before March of 2020, this is sort of an outline of how we did it. We had one physical book on loan for every 25 students. The loans were typically 2 hours long for reserves. They were a little bit longer if someone was taking them out overnight or if it was a weekend long loan. If we had multiple copies on reserve, then those could go out for longer. We also had physical copies of DVDs and VHSs that could go out on loan. These usually were 4 hours at a time, and these were only in library use only. We also had a number of DVDs or VHSs that were professors' personal copies that they would give to the library for the semester so that students could loan them out. Usually this is if it was a media that was not widely distributed or we were not able to find through our usual vendors. We did also use electronic resources. When we were looking for e-copies of books, we would only purchase things that were unlimited user copies in order to get, I guess, the most bang for your buck, you can say. And we did streaming media as well. It was a pretty popular request, mostly in the film department, which makes sense, using Alexander Street, Canopy, and Swank as our main vendors. After the pandemic started in March 2020, we went completely off-site. And so one of the questions was, how could we transfer reserves from how we used to have it to a way that we can have it now that would best suit our students, many of whom were now off campus, some of whom would not have, obviously if they were off campus, would not have access to physical copies because we couldn't mail books to them. Then the question of how we could best support their studies using electronic and technology only. So we moved from only using physical copies as a last resort. That was only if there was no electronic copies of anything available would we put a physical loan on reserve. And even then, these reserves copies were not available to be loaned out. Users would have to request scans of chapters or small segments of the books. And that was also some issues that have to do with copyright. All available e-copies were then purchased for books. So we were doing, even if it was only 1 user access or 3 user access, as long as it was an electronic version, we were purchasing them. We then also recently have switched into using Overdrive to purchase book copies. This has been kind of a challenge in terms of reserves because for Overdrive, you can't change the loan periods to only be a few hours at a time. So anything that we ordered now is available for loan for 2 weeks at a time through Overdrive. Because of our physical stacks being closed, we also have access to the HappyTrust/ETOS, the temporary emergency books that we were adding to reserves. Streaming has definitely exploded for us. Different departments are now requesting streaming more and more. With that, we still are purchasing them mainly from the 3 vendors that we usually use, again, Canopy, Base Mike, and Alexander Street. But there's also been the question of whether or not we should be using sites such as YouTube, which really brings up a lot of legal and technical questions around using these sites in terms of whether the links will be broken in a few weeks, if they are videos that were legally put online, and what the copyright issues are around that.
So the Burkett was in a similar place in our pre-COVID environment. Our loans for physical items were 3 hours, and we had a local policy where if students came in within 1 hour of closing, they could keep the item overnight until 1 hour after opening the next day. About 80% of the faculty at the seminary were using course reserves through the Burke, and they would drop those lists off to me in person at my desk. Either they would show up or their teaching assistant would come in person to give me those reading lists. Our ebook policy, we only purchased an electronic copy if it was approved by the faculty. This comes from the space of most of our faculty want physical items. That has to do with the kind of subject area. Humanities scholars in general are very big on physical copies, which I'm sure other people here can relate to. So we prioritized a physical item over an ebook. That was our exclusive policy. And then I would say about 80% of the faculty were utilizing course reserves for the students. And about, I would say, most of our things held on the reserve shelves went out daily. There was a lot of independent scanning by students, by faculty, by whomever of the copies held on reserves on a daily basis. In the post or current ongoing pandemic period, we've come up against a special problem in theology and religion subject area acquisitions, where a lot of the content is just not available as an ebook. It doesn't exist. This has created confusion with faculty, especially when you hear well, I saw it on Kindle on Amazon, and then we would have to explain that, well, our systems don't work with that, our vendors don't have that, and we cannot get an electronic copy. So we actually had a pretty robust, what I was calling pseudo reserves, because I didn't want to use the term reserves with faculty because that gets way too confusing. So we had a fairly robust collection of items this year that we had to purchase the physical copy because there was no ebook. So a lot of localized scanning, which meant that our internal document delivery exploded. It's been a year, which I'm sure you all can relate to. And I would say faculty usually have issues with discovery layers in terms of finding resources. So because of that, and because of all the changes, and a resistance to using the electronic form that we have to submit course reserves, most faculty have not been using course reserves, which means that students are having to fend for themselves in ways that they didn't have to do in our pre-March 2020 context. So what are some of the overarching challenges in this new normal? So the first thing I want to talk about is student needs. It's been proven that course reserves allow students to succeed academically, specifically for those who are in low income and first generation college student demographic, and especially for our international students. Course reserves are a hugely important part of their access to readings and then their academic success. Students aren't going to buy things that they can't afford. And if they can't buy things that they can't afford, they're not going to engage with the material. And so that impacts their learning as well. So what has the pandemic brought to light? What are these new challenges? A digital divide. There is a gap that has been pronounced in the pandemic between those that have access to computing technology and personal computing devices and even the internet. It can't be assumed that everybody can access a digital copy of a course reserves book in these days. And so that's been exponentially, I guess it's just been a big divide that has just been pronounced during the pandemic period. Also, when students don't have access to the physical items within the collection and they can't come in and browse the shelves and they can't come in and physically touch the things that they need and get access to them, there's a lack of ownership there that happens. And when that happens, there's this overall lack of engagement. Students aren't going to utilize resources that are hard for them to find and hard for them to get to. Especially in a pandemic period, lots of people have a lot of things going on, a lot of different demands on their time. And that is true of students as well. They're not just students. And so if something is too difficult to access, if it's too hard to find online, if there's a boundary and a barrier to that access, they're not going to use it. Yeah, they're not going to try. So, and that leads us to finances. It was already the case that things are expensive. Books are expensive, especially in the sciences. Textbooks can cost $400 to $500 for one textbook. And that is something that students relied on course reserves for those items. And they didn't purchase them themselves because there's no budget there for that. Not only that, but there's a steady increase in subscription costs, especially through libraries. I'm sure we all know this. Things have just been getting more expensive. And so our budgets are already stretched. So when you're facing higher costs, you have to decide what you're going to continue subscribing to and A lot of times decisions have been made to stop subscribing to things that are essential for faculty in their classes. And that poses an issue for access as well. And then we have this question of, is it better to have limited access than no access at all? That creates some concerns with course reserves when you have 35 people all needing the same single user only ebook copy, and they're all trying to read it at the same time. And then you have to triage those incoming questions, especially through our Ask a Librarian chat service. A lot of those questions have been around, I need to read this book for my class, and when I go on, it says it's already checked out. What do I do? And you just have to tell them, well, wait a few hours, try again tomorrow. But if they're reading for class tomorrow, that's hard. They can't get it. So is it better to have the one single user only ebook, or perhaps not? So like Jennifer said, this pandemic has exploded the demand for e-copies and for media streaming. We've had to come up with like some pretty creative collaborations. Other universities have started partnering with their campus bookstore to work on triaging who's going to buy what. Maybe the library budget will go to these certain items and the bookstore budget can go to these other ones, so that we're not both purchasing the same things. And then there's been heightened exploration of how OERs can be integrated into courses. In our particular context at the Burke, we started a few years ago, right in 2019, the Black Theology Papers Project is hosted at Columbia on our within our electronic platforms, and it's a combined effort of scholars at Xavier University and a professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York. And we have seen that this particular open access project has been integrated into the courses during this pandemic period in the seminary in a way in which we could not have anticipated. And there are other institutions, especially within SUNY, that have incentive options for faculty who want to create an OER to use. So that has also come into play due to the pandemic.
So another main issue that we've been dealing with is the question of faculty collaboration. Obviously, many of these changes cannot be implemented without faculty input. For example, we can't really do outreach around OERs if faculty are not willing to either create or use OERs as required reading in classes. There's also the question around how much faculty really understand about reserve services and the library specific details. Through the pandemic, there have been some issues around faculty members not really understanding how electronic content is purchased or how streaming works, as Deanna was talking about. I feel like at least once a week I get an email from a professor whose reserves list I've processed who is having trouble with some of the links that have been used just because they haven't really had to use these before. And in general, in some of the research we've done and in our own experience, we've noticed that faculty sometimes are just unaware or unwilling to utilize course reserves. They also sometimes don't really understand that reserves works mainly in order to mitigate textbook costs for students. So if we are focused on helping, for example, first generation, low income, international, and other students be able to offset costs by providing textbooks for them, it's often difficult when we have such a limited library budget and faculty members are continually asking for very high cost textbooks to be placed on reserves. Through the pandemic, we've also noticed that sometimes faculty are not really used to using electronic resources. As Deanna mentioned, in certain fields, such as in theology or the arts, faculty are used to the physical copies or want the physical copies, but that doesn't always translate to having electronic copies available either through our vendors or, again, with the copyright issues. I know our peers over at Avery, the art library, sometimes have issues finding electronic copies because the copyright only extends to the text inside of a book and not the actual pictures. So if you're asking students to study a famous painting, but there's no copyright on the electronic copy, they can't even look at the image, right? So because of the pandemic, there has been an increased need for communication between librarians and faculty, especially as things have been shifting rapidly. So some of the ways that that's been happening have been liaison librarians really pushing for instruction and outreach to include them, as well as increased communication between faculty and library staff through emails. It's sometimes a little difficult because before the pandemic, professors could just come up to the circ desk, talk to a staff member, but now this is really the only form of communication that we could use. And then, of course, there are issues of funding around incentivizing faculty to use or create OER and other low cost or free materials, but it is still a viable option in teaching it, especially because of the ease of access electronically. But again, because of issues of library budgets, we can't really afford to provide like grants for faculty to create them. So the last part of this section of the presentation, we just wanted to show, I know that it's very small, so it's hard to see, but we just wanted to show you our literature review. This actually started out as an assignment that I did for class, and then I started working with Deanna on the reserve subcommittee that we have here at Columbia, specifically focusing on the research for how other libraries and other academic institutions are really focusing on how things have to change in reserves from before the pandemic to now, especially in terms of providing electronic access, while also thinking through things like the digital divide, thinking through the high costs of purchasing these electronic copies and streaming copies. So when we were doing this research, we compiled this literature review that really focused on all of these issues within reserves. We used it as a guiding point, not only for this presentation, but also as recommendations that we presented to the Reserves Committee here to really discuss how we see the future of reserves going and start a discussion that is really pertinent to the work that we have to do. So the main topics that we found in the reserves, again, in the literature, were about connecting reserves really to student needs. So making sure that all that the work that we're doing is really focusing on what students need from us as a library. Building outreach and engagement across departments, focusing on collaboration, looking more into open educational resources, and staying up to date with emerging technologies.
So now I think we're gonna go into our breakout rooms. Looks like we've got about 30 people here. So I don't know, 4 rooms perhaps. But these are, it's time to talk about it, to discuss how this has been going for you all in your contexts, based around the loose themes of student needs, financial impacts, and then faculty collaboration. And then I think Jennifer and I are going to bounce around to the groups. Jennifer, if you want to say, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. Okay, but yeah, so it's time for group brainstorming. And then after this is done, we'll come back together and report out. So if you all within your groups can choose one person to share aloud when we come back together, that would be great. So we're going to move into breakout rooms for about the next 15 minutes, and then we'll have, or I guess maybe the next 5-ish minutes, we'll go into breakout rooms and then come back and report.
Oh, yes, the person who has their hand raised. if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, this is Simone from Teachers College, Columbia University. I came in a little late, so do I leave the meeting room to find a breakout room? Is that how it's going to work? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
Yeah, so I think I think we need to set up the breakout rooms. I think that I'm setting them up now. So I've created 4. You'll be assigned automatically, and it'll give you an indication of which room to go to, and you can follow that. So hopefully this is streamlined and you can get to where you're going. So I just created them and they're all open now.
Sorry, one more question. I'm on an iPad. Oh, I see it's working. Never mind. Thank you so much. Bye.
You're welcome.
I didn't get a breakout room. I don't know.
Me neither.
Okay, so
I'm waiting for invite.
Okay.
I didn't get a breakout room either.
okay, a few didn't.
Okay, let's see.
This will be our breakout room.
Maybe.
Yeah, let's see. That's so strange. Weird Zoom things. Okay. But yeah, we can also talk here. I think that's okay. Okay, so names, trying to figure out who is not, I don't even see you all in the options. So that's
weird.
not good. Yeah.
It's all right. We can just use this.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry about that. Yay, Zoom technology issues. So
you know
yeah.
what? When I clicked on those ellipses on my screen, and it says gives me more options. One of them is join breakout room. And then I get a window that pops up that tells me what room I'm supposed to go to. So maybe we have to initiate that step. I don't know. Maybe it depends on how you've sized your screen. I don't know. But anyway, I found my room. Mine doesn't say that.
No, me neither.
An assigned room.
Yeah, I don't know why that's happening because I can see folks are assigned to different rooms. As a co-host, I can see that, but I'm not sure why it didn't pop up for you.
So are we supposed to pick our own topics in here to discuss?
Yeah, so we just use these topics sort of to guide the conversations because we're really interested in hearing how everyone else has been handling reserves during the pandemic and sort of what are main takeaways and lessons that you've learned doing reserves work. And if you haven't been doing reserves work, just generally how access work or library work has been going for you during the pandemic and how you saw any of these main topics really affecting your work and what you would like to see changed moving forward or what changes you've already implemented in your work.
Okay. Well, I can start. I'm at Stony Brook, and during the pandemic, we stopped all physical course reserves. And we switched to electronic, and where we could, we purchased electronic material to support that if we didn't already have it in the collection. We also really encouraged the library faculty to promote open access resources as well. And then in the summer, I got one request for a physical reserve. And because our stacks are reopening, I just processed it. I don't think that it's actually been checked out. And to be honest, our physical course reserves has very low circulation anyway. And so it is my hope that going forward that we can kind of prioritize the online course reserves, the electronic over the physical. But I know that some people really like to have the physical and some are only available in physical format. But I would like to know if the research shows that students prefer electronic, or where that balance is.
Hi, Jennifer. I'm in a similar situation. Lisa, I'm from Nassau Community College. We had a very robust physical reserve collection. Our students loved it, and we completely closed it during the pandemic. Not only that, but our administration has decided not to support it anymore. And I have no idea what the faculty feedback is going to be in the fall, because nobody has told them yet. And I think my chairperson's kind of holding off before making the announcement. But we have all sorts of students and student abilities and disabilities, and they have liked the print. And although we can push the digital resources, I think print in our case has a value, and I think it's going to be missed.
Lisa, is it a purely budgetary reason that they're not supporting it, or it is budget?
Yes, it seems to be budget. I mean, they are going through a budget with a fine tooth comb. They're rejecting recs. I mean, it's a mess here. But,
wow.
Yeah, they've just decided they weren't going to give us the money to support that collection anymore.
Yes, I imagine you'll hear from faculty and students alike.
I just want to add too that we can't afford the digital copies because our FTEs are pretty high. We can't afford unlimited users for the digital resources. So that we're just like stuck between hard stuff.
There's a comment from Fatima who says her mic stopped working, but they had a hard time at Farmingdale when they were shut down fall and summer. They reopened in the fall and they're open now, but no budget. That was taken away last year. And so students rely on reserves heavily, and she's really worried about what will happen when they all return. Yeah, I think that's even though I think that at Stony Brook, there's a small group that rely on or that come in for the physical reserves. I think that those who do rely on them heavily. And I think the faculty, we do have faculty who, regardless of what goes out every semester, they put loads and loads on reserve. And that's a service that they feel is important, which is why when we just had the one, initially we had decided not to do reserves over the summer, the physical reserves, but I just felt like, let me just process the one and see how it goes. But what we are doing is lengthening our reserve time. So we used to have 2 and 4 hours. Now it's going to be 1, 2, and 7 days. And that's to reduce that interaction at the service desk.
It's actually a really good idea,
Yeah, I think just for the staff's safety and just a feeling of safety and not knowing really what we're going into in the fall, we'll start with that and see how it works.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing all of that. I think people should start making their way back here soon. So thank you for sharing. Okay, I think people are slowly making their way back here. So Jennifer, if you just want to take us to the last few minutes here.
Yep. So as the rooms start closing, I'm just gonna put this link in the chat. So we thought it would be a pretty good idea to have everyone come back and be able to sort of share what they talked about in their groups. As well as if you wanted to type it out, we have a Padlet here, and it's really based on the guiding questions of what reserves practices do we want to expand on moving forward. But you can also use it to express any comments or fears that you have. I know in like the larger group, folks are talking about the reserve services being cut entirely. And I'm curious to see if folks who are in the breakout rooms have been experiencing that as well, and sort of what steps they see moving forward that can be taken in order to either try to work with the administration or look to see what other alternatives can be made to really help students be able to access their materials, because it's really that's really sad that you can't even have reserves anymore when we know that so many students really rely on them. I don't really see.
Yeah, the rooms are closed, so I don't know what happened.
Oh no.
Well, I do have a question. I'm wondering what you all are doing or planning to take from your pandemic experience and incorporate as you start to reopen.
Yeah, so one of the things that the Burke is going to be doing that is sort of new for us is we're going to be hosting faculty sessions in the early fall on how do you find things electronically, how do you use course reserves, why we can't purchase e-copies of some of these items because Kindle doesn't work with our system. So we're going to be having, while we can't make them mandatory, we're going to be offering 2 different sessions, on 2 different days at 2 different times of the week, to try and bring in as many of the faculty as we can and just kind of give them a basic how to find things and go over, especially in the seminary context, the social justice issue of course reserves and how as faculty who are at a theological institution who all strive their best to be stewards of social justice, that course reserves is a part of that social justice. So who knows how it will go, but that's one thing that we're offering in the fall that's brand new.
For us, some of the things that we're going to implement are sort of up in the air right now because we're not sure whether our stacks are going to be open. We're thinking that they might be open. If they are, that means that we're going to be losing access to the Hoppy Trust and the ETOS access. So then that's going to mean that we're going to have to try to purchase even more ebooks or continue to put things on physical reserves. One of the things that we're really focusing on is looking at streaming materials and what some of the copyright issues might be around that and what it would look like to use alternative sites such as YouTube or Vimeo. I mean, as long as everything is legal, of course, in order to add those things to streaming titles that we are giving students access to, as well as our usual vendors.
Anybody else has anything to share or some last minute questions? If not, thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming. And I hope this was enjoyable and somewhat informative for you all. And if it's helpful, we can provide out the literature review to the SUNYLA conference folks, and they can get it out to you all if that's helpful.
Yeah, sorry everyone, we're still trying to, it looks like we're just ending a little bit early because it looks like there's something happening with the breakout rooms where we can't close them and folks aren't coming out. So sorry about that, but it was good to talk to the folks who are in this large room and sort of hear what other folks are experiencing.
And just a reminder that we do have the hub, that's the online discussion forum, so you can continue the conversation over there as well. And thank you both. I thought it was really interesting.
So yeah, sorry about that technical glitch.
No problem. There always has to be one. At least one, right? No, I thought it was really informative and you did a good job. So
Thank you all and have a good summer and hope to see you in other spaces throughout the rest of the conference.